Bonjour, welcome to Wahsa Citizens Education Center's radio Zoom classes. This is SVN3E, grade 11 workplace science, and I'm the teacher, Bronwyn Slade. If you'd like to participate live today, you're welcome to call the Wahsa studio at 1-800-465-7144 or 737-4017. You can listen on the radio at 91.9 FM and also on the television at Bell Express View Channel 972. Sorry. Just choking on saliva. Anyway, you are always welcome to join me through the Zoom link, which is available for me and also your DEC. Our classes are scheduled from Monday through Thursday from 3 till 4 in the afternoon. And we are in our 9th week of our 9-week course. We are actually on our last day. Today is our last session on the year. So a reminder that tomorrow, June 10th, is the last day to submit your work. So please, if you haven't handed it in to me tomorrow, please, or communicate with me. If something's going on in your world, I'm happy to be flexible, but I need communication. You definitely at this point should know what your work is that you should be submitting. The key questions are all listed at the end of each of your lessons. So please do all of them. Checking your understanding. Activities and review questions are throughout your workbook. It'll be all of your understanding in terms of like full sentences and complete ideas. Make sure you're actually answering the question that is being asked. You can do this either electronically or by hand. Both are completely fine with me. I don't mind. If you want to write in the workbook, go for it. I'm okay with that. But the spaces are really small. So I would encourage you to use a separate piece of paper just in order to give yourself enough space to truly articulate your ideas and make sure I can read them. If you'd like to submit your work, if you'd like to do it electronically, Word and Google Doc files are the ones that are easiest for me to access. Everyone does have access to Google Docs through your NNEC email address. But if that you don't have to do that, I can help you out. That's totally fine. Also, if you're using a different format, a different file type, I'm sure it's probably fine. Just touch base with me so I can make sure that I can actually open your files. There are 3 different methods for submitting work. The first is to scan your work and send electronically. So you can scan your completed works in through a smart device, either the iPhone Notes app or the Android Google Drive app. Both have scan functions that are fairly straightforward. If you'd rather just take a picture, if that's what works for you, that's fine too. It's the end. My brain is a little fried. Then you can send it to me either through email at studentwork@nnec.owen.ca and CCH to broadwood.slade@nnec.owen.ca, or you can also send it to me through Facebook Messenger, where my name is B. Slade Wahsa. The second method is to use our Dropbox that is on at our side entrance. We are located at 74 Front Street with a bright red building next to the post office, and we have a small white mailbox next to our side door. Then the third method is that you can hand your work into your DEC. So your DEC can either send your work through the Express or fax it to 807-737-1732 or toll-free fax to 1-800-463-7852. You're always welcome to connect with me through social media. Both my Facebook and my YouTube channel are under the name B. Slade Wahsa. All of our radio Zoom classes are recorded and I upload them to YouTube. They are in a playlist called SVN3E. All of the supplementary videos that we've watched in class are in a playlist under SVN3E. There's a supplementary videos playlist within that folder as well. So you can access them all there from the original sources if you'd like. Science is a really visual subject. I work to incorporate as many diagrams and charts, images, as well as videos into the lesson to really tap into all of our learning, all of our brain functions. So just listening to it on the radio is not really going to give you the full experience. So either joining me live through Zoom or watching the YouTube replays are really going to set you up for the most success. If you don't have access to either of those and you'd like to still watch the videos, at this point, it's too late for this term, but in the future, if you reach out to me, then I can send you a copy of the videos. If you'd like to discuss anything with me, please reach out. If you have any questions, my number is 807-737-1488, extension 2209, or toll free 1-800-667-3703. My email address is bronwyn.slate@nnec.on.ca, and my Facebook is bslatewasa. Again, just to make sure we drive the point home, June 10th, tomorrow is the last day to hand in your work. If you're hoping to hand in work, tomorrow's the last day for this term. Otherwise, you need to re-register for the course. I believe it's important to position myself as an educator with what my privileges and power I have within our system. I have white settler ancestry. I have white privilege, and this means that the barriers in education have been less for me than many other folks. The system is set up to help me succeed as a white person. So I recognize that, and I'm working to disrupt that pattern, as I think that it is oppressive and it's not okay. So I don't have it all figured out at all, but I am committed to doing anti-oppression education and dismantling the system of white supremacy as much as I can to be part of that action. I live in Northwestern Ontario on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe people, and I'm working to learn from this community around me. It is my first time teaching this course, so I have had lots to learn and unlearn. It's been a process, and I don't have it all figured out, but hopefully as I continue to teach this course, I will learn and unlearn more things and make it more accessible and relevant to our students. Our textbook is also very Eurocentric. I noticed that it may use some problematic language, and it definitely ignores Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis knowledges and experiences. So this is very inappropriate and concerning. I've attempted to integrate some of these realities to our lessons, but I definitely am not an expert and have missed, I'm sure, much. So if you have any feedback about how I could improve and make our class more accessible and more relevant to our the Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis people in our communities, I would be happy to do that. All right, we are reviewing units 6 and 7 today, our last day. But first, just a quick overview what the final assessment is. Once you hand in all of your lessons, you need to do a final unit as well. There is no exam, but there is a culminating assignment. It covers all 23 of the lessons. It's open book, so you are able to use your assignments, to use the YouTube videos and your IL booklet and the workbook. Everything is up for you to use. It is not timed, but it does have a deadline. The deadline is technically tomorrow, though if you haven't handed in all your work yet, I have some flexibility if you have handed in any work. So please reach out to me. The structure is unfamiliar as it is not just directly answering questions. It's more of a problem-based situation where you can apply everything that you've learned so far this year. All right, so let's look at our lessons. We've got lesson 19, which is the importance of biodiversity to the sustainability of life. So biodiversity, we talked about, there are 3 different types. So we talked about community or ecological diversity, and this is when the ecosystem is vary within a geographical area. So the fact that we do not have all the same types of plants and animals and climates everywhere in the world is the community diversity element. The fact that we have variety means that we thrive more because we aren't just all the exact same thing and able to, like, we need diversity in order to thrive and survive. Then we have genetic diversity. which is when you have genetic variability within the species. So we talked about birds or orca whales and how they genetic diversity means that we survive and we thrive in different ways because we're not all doing the exact same thing the exact same time. Means that we are not constantly competing with everybody else. And then we have the species diversity, which is the variety of species and an abundance of species. Again, all of these ways are helping us, the individuals, survive and thrive because we can adapt to different situations and we do not need the exact same thing, and therefore we aren't in constant competition. Then we talked about abiotic and biotic factors. So abiotic are the non-living factors that are part of an ecosystem that affect biodiversity. So sunlight, soil, rocks, wind, water, things like that. Whereas biotic are the living factors, are the plants and the animals within an ecosystem. We talked about the example of the Humboldt squid and how it is a global warming winner because with global warming changing the climate and changing the temperatures of the ocean, the Humboldt squid is less restricted. It is able to thrive in a larger area and therefore has access to more prey. And so therefore it's doing really, really well. Okay. Review questions. Question number 1 on page 161. Give one example why genetic diversity is important to any species. So for me, the example that we talked about in our lesson was the orca whale. And I thought that it really made it really, really clear. So there are orca whales that eat fish. And orca whales that eat seals. This diversifies their food options. And limits their competition. It also means that if one of the food resources is eliminated, then not all orca whales are going to be impacted. So it protects them from that danger of, yes, it means that some possibly, say if all of a sudden the seals disappeared, then the orca whales that eat the seals could either adapt and start eating other things, or they might die off, but not all orca whales would die off because they're not dependent upon just one food source. Right, number 3, describe 2 ways plants provide ecological goods and services. So to me, the one service is processing carbon dioxide. Sorry. And releasing oxygen. So then we can breathe oxygen where we can't breathe carbon dioxide. So that is a service that they provide. I also just think the calming effects of nature on our mental health. Essential. Number 8, identify a living thing you think will not be a global warming winner. and describe the environmental conditions that would have to change for this living thing to be a winner. This is worded really strangely in your textbook, and I took out a word because it didn't make any sense when that word was in. So it's slightly different than what your book says and what you've been asked to answer. So personally, I think humans are not going to be a global warming winner. Warming winner. We don't benefit from global warming. It is getting more and more harmful and concerning for us. So I think that taking climate crisis seriously and taking direct, effective action is needed to make change so that we might actually survive this. Okay. Lesson 20, measuring and monitoring species biodiversity. So with this lesson, we looked at sampling. So we've talked about biodiversity and what it is. And now this lesson, we're talking about how we can learn about it more and what scientists do in order to learn about them. So sampling is how do we get information about plants and animals within their natural habitat. So we talked about quadrat sampling and line transect sampling, and then using aerial photography to be able to sample larger areas or areas that are more inaccessible. And we talked about the Lincoln Index and how it is a capture, mark, and recapture system of population tracking. So how large different groups of animals are. Quadrat and line transect and aerial photography work well for things that are inanimate, things that do not move very much, so plants, and some slow moving or minimal moving animals as well, like mollusks or clams, things like barnacles, things like that. But the Lincoln Index works for animals because they all move basically. So then there's different tools that you can use for capturing. So the capture, mark, recapture idea is that you capture a certain amount of the population that you are, so you capture the bunch, you mark them so that you know that you captured them before, that you've counted them before, and then a defined period later, you recapture the same animals. You're obviously not going to be able to recapture all of the exact same animals. So then there is a calculation about how to count how many you actually have. So using ratios to figure out what proportion you have captured in relation to the whole. Then you can predict how many of that particular species there actually are without having to capture all of the animals and count them. So then there are different ways of capturing. So we talked about aquatic dip nets in terms of catching bugs and small water creatures. Mist nets, which was catching small birds. Helicopter net gunning and darting, which is when you are capturing large, or you're marking large animals that are fast and potentially dangerous to try to get close to. So they get tranquilized before the humans come close to them. And then also live traps, which there are various, we looked at turkey live traps, but just ways to the point is not to harm the animals. So all of these capturing methods, none of them harm the animals. They may stress them out for a bit. I don't know if that is ever measured. I would assume that it would stress them out. I'm sure being captured stresses animals out, but they're not harmed to them once they are released. They are able to function back in their own ecosystems and be fine. And then we talk about how the mark element of capture mark capture system and how wildlife is tagged and tracked. So there's the alphanumeric system where there's just little codes that are put on little flags or bands, things that are put on animals that just really indicate, like catalog that they've been captured before and what information was gathered previously, with letters and numbers on their little ID card kind of thing. It's not a card, but different ways. And then we talked about wildlife auto radio tracking, which is what a collar is put on an animal. Then that collar transmits a radio signal that people can then, it's transmitted to a receiver that people have, and then that gives them information about where they are and how things are moving. And then finally, there's a GPS tracking system, which connects to satellites in terms of, again, tracking, but instead of radio tracking, a satellite system tracks those animals. Great. Review question number 1 on page 169. What is one difference between how living things are sampled in a quadrat sampling and line transect sampling? So remember, quadrat sampling is when you just get a patch and then you count all of the things, you note the things within your sample and then within your rectangle or your defined area, and then you go to another area and you have your same size sample, and you count in this one the things, or you note the things that you're trying to track. So you just sort of have these small squares. They could be rectangles, they could be circles, they could be different shapes, but you have these random patches that you are collecting information about, and that's quadrat sampling. Whereas line transect sampling is when you are measuring along a line. So you have a line and you're either counting all of the things along your line. So every single point along your line, you are indicating information about it. Or you could also have a combination of the two, where you have your line and then you are using quadrats at intervals to gather information about the area that you were studying. So the quadrat is more scattered, whereas line transect is one straight line that either you're doing it continuously or at set intervals. All right, find the unknown for each of the following samplings. This is using the in index. It's not in the question, but that's what makes sense. So for this, n equals n1 times n2 divided by m. You do not need to have this memorized. It is completely fine. If you don't, you can look it up. I don't have it memorized. Well, I do, but not intentionally. So I'm really, really hopeful that I wrote it down accurately, because that's what came to mind. But now I'm looking it up because now I'm worried that I did it wrong. No, that's right. Okay, so what that is saying, so for A, we're looking for N, so that is the total population. That's what we're trying to figure out. And so N1 is your first capture, and you mark them. So in our first, this example, in our first capture, we captured 10 animals and we marked them, indicated that we found them. Then we released them. They went back into their populations. They mixed really well. It was a defined set of period of time that was logical. And then we captured them again. And the second time we captured them, we captured 20 animals. Out of the 20 animals that we captured, there were 4 animals that were marked. So to figure out our total population, we do 10 times 20. So that is 200 divided by 4. So 200 divided by 4 is 50. So the total population of this species in this area is 50. So for B, if we do it again, this time we still caught 10 the first time around. And the second time around we caught 20. But instead we, in our second capture, instead of there only be 4 that we found that were marked, 8 of them were marked. So 10 times 20 is still 200. Then divided by 8 is going to be 25. So that means our total population is 25. So because there were more of the animals that we caught, there was a greater ratio. That means that there's less animals overall. Whereas when there were less animals that were caught, there were more animals overall. And that's how that gives us an idea of the population using the Lincoln index. Number 12, suppose you have to devise a way to sample a population of invasive beetles. What method would you use? So for this is an opinion sort of type. There's not a right answer. There's many people would give different answers. So you need to give yourself, you need to back up the reasoning why you would choose that. So in terms of devising a way to sample a population of invasive beetles, I think I would, so I would sample them on their food source. So I think I would sort of do similar to a line transect sample where it's sort of in a space, but I would do it like sample on food source and nearby on food source. So this is sort of like a modified I guess it could be either modified quadrat or modified lines transect, really, depending on what you think you're modifying. So because I am doing it in a defined way, but I am doing it at not exactly in a line, these might be they might be clusters opposed to a straight line. But I think that would make sense to figure out how many of them are on their food source where they are invading and how many of them are on areas around, and what does that potentially mean. Okay, lesson 21, Canada's natural resources. So now we've shifted into chapter 7. So we looked at the renewable natural resources, and remember, renewable natural resources are defined as resources that are able to naturally replenish themselves before we are depleting them. So they have within a reasonable lifespan. So most of these things could be non-renewable. They could be decimated if we weren't being considerate. If we just fish all the fish, then they are not able to populate and regenerate themselves because there would be no adult fish to regenerate and repopulate. So that renewables can be a little bit tricky because we could, it's not a guarantee thing. It's we have to do things sustainably and practically. So we looked at fisheries, wildlife, forests, and water. And then we looked at non-renewable resources. And so those are the fossil fuels that we talked a great deal about, as well as minerals and metals. So these sources are not able, though fossil fuels could be replenished in the earth, it takes millions of years. So that's not really a realistic timeline for us to be like, well, we can get more gas, more oil in 2 billion years when all the current organic matter has decomposes and been compressed in the earth, and then we're good to go. Like that's, yeah, not a practical source of energy or resources. So number 3 on page 177 is what is groundwater. So groundwater is water in the ground, but more specifically, to define it, it's below the Earth's surface. So water below the Earth's surface. So in the soil or in the rock bed. Describe which of Canada's renewable natural resources you think is the most valuable and why. So again, this is a opinion question. You get to decide what you think, and the key point is that why part. So I believe water is the most valuable natural resource. We are dependent upon it. And cannot replace it with anything else. So if we run out of clean drinking water, we are snookered. We won't survive. So that is the foundation to basically everything that we, both plants and animals, in their function. Water is essential. So we can do without fish, we can do without wildlife, we can do without forests. It would definitely be an adjustment, but we can't do without water, and we can't replace it with anything. Even if most of our other liquids that we drink are, water is a component of it. Like it still plays a part in the liquid. So I think that's the most valuable natural resource that we have. Number 8, what is meant by the statement that Canada's economy is resource-based? So we make the most money off of our natural resources. So we make some money in terms of tourism, partially because of our natural resources. So people come and see our mountains, see our lakes, see our wildlife. We make money on exporting oil and gas. We make money on exporting fish. We make money on exporting hydro from hydroelectric dams. We make money on exporting nuclear energy. So all of these things, that is really where our economy thrives. We don't thrive because of our entertainment sector or because we are excellent manufacturers. Yes, some of it, we do have some entertainment, we do have some manufacturing, we do have some like computer and technology and engineering things, but that is not what we thrive on. That is not what really makes us do the best. So other places in the world have other sectors that are more prevalent and they thrive. Their economy thrives on it. In Canada, our economy thrives based on timber, based on fish, based on oil. These are the things that we have that means that we are a wealthy country. All right, lesson 22, methods for extracting Canada's natural resources. So now that we talk about what our natural resources are, how do we get them out of the ground, basically, or out of the environment? So we talked about commercial fishing and the ways that that is done in terms of gill netting, purse seining, fish farms, and how there are advantages and disadvantages to all three of these methods. Then we talked about forestry and silviculture systems, so different ways that forests can be logged that have, again, advantages and disadvantages. And then we talked about industrial minerals, specifically mining salt, and room and pillar mining systems, and also brining mining systems. So our question number 5 on page 185, list 3 examples of how selective fishing modifies and improves on conventional fishing methods. So if we think back to our gill netting and our purse seine systems. So one thing is that for selective fishing means that it's more than just catching everything and then dumping out what you don't want in the garbage, basically, but it's being more conscious about what you're catching. So with selective purse seining, let's have bigger holes to allow small fish escape. These fish are not what they're fishing for, so there's no point in catching them. Then the gill nets have a weed line. 20. To lower the top boundary. So small fish swim over. And then like nets and like live traps. Are used for species that are caught that are unwanted. So instead of them just being tossed aside, they are kept in a safe way and then returned back to their natural environments. Number 10, why is having a silviculture system important to ensuring that forests remain healthy? So a silviculture system is really a plan. And so it covers all of the decisions that are made to managing a forest. So a plan means we are forward thinking. And analyzing potential outcomes. This just means that we're making educated decisions opposed to ones that just impact that are going to have lifelong impacts that are unhealthy to the environment. And then 14, describe how the underground room and pillar mining is used to extract salt. So remember how this works is that we have a mine. So we have that is deep, deep, deep under the ground. So then there's a shaft sent down so that like an elevator sort of thing with people and machines. And then this might have layers probably. And then the room, there's like little rooms that are dug out and extracted for the salt extracted from. So instead of there being just taking everything out, these little rooms are extracted and pillars are left to hold up what is left so that it doesn't just all crumble down. So a lot is really left behind in order to be safe. Just small portions, small little rooms are what are extracted out and then shipped up the shaft. It's the same over here. All right, lesson 23, our last lesson. So managing Canada's natural resources. So here we talked about how to monitor and maintain sustainability for fish and forests. And then also mining minerals, how to make it viable, how to make it worth it, but also how to deal with the cleanup and the reclaiming of mining spaces. Mining has a really big impact on the land. And so it's important to plan how to allow nature to reclaim those spaces and thrive. And we talked about the oil sands as an example of how it is an excessive pollutant, but we depend on oil very much, back to that question of our natural resources being the basis of our economy. And so we can't really stop doing it until we develop alternative affordable options. So we can say people should not be driving their cars, but if we force people to drive to work in order to survive, in order to go into work, then people have to get there in some way. So they have to either drive or take public transportation, or even if they're carpooling, even if we're doing all of the things the best that we can do, if we're still expecting people to leave their homes and have and all of our vehicles, the majority of our affordable vehicles are gas-based, then we are going to continue to have to get gas and oil out of the ground. So until we prioritize alternative options, we are not going to be able to escape using oil. It is not reasonable to blame the poor for using the resources that we have because the wealthy are not investing in it in the long run. We can't tell people who can barely afford food that they have to buy an electric car. That just doesn't make any sense. All right, so our review questions on page 193. How can removing trees have an impact on the biodiversity and health of an ecosystem? So removing trees means that we are removing habitats for animals, birds. It means we are removing a root system that protects the soil. It means we are removing the carbon sink that are forests and releasing carbon back into the oxygen, or sorry, carbon back in the atmosphere. So I'm not saying that logging is something that we cannot do at all, but that's why having a plan in place that is sustainable to the forest, that sustains the forest, is really important. 10, what factors do mining companies have to consider before building a mine? So they need to make sure that the mine is viable. So that means that it is it worth it, financially worth it? It needs to, they need to consider the local communities. They need to consider and connect with the local indigenous population. And speak to them about their concerns and what the impacts are going to be on the land. And in your opinion, what has to change in Canadian society before the oil sands project will be halted? So I think that we need to invest in alternative energy forms. And make them affordable. Ideally, we would move away from a capitalist society. But that might be a bit of a stretch. I don't know if that's going to happen before we environmentally implode. So, but right now we are, as a capitalist society, means that we are so focused on making money and that being where our value is, that we are ignoring the value of the earth and nature and that the ecosystems around us, and putting more value on these digital numbers. And that means that that is the most important thing. If that were to change, then I think that a lot of things would come apart and a lot of things would really shift, particularly environmentally. All right, and that is our covering of units 6 and 7. So we've now covered our entire course, reviewing all 7 chapters, and hopefully you have a well understanding of environmental science and the strengths within our environment and the challenges and the barriers and the conflict that is also happening, and what maybe we can start doing to improve, and how important this is. If you have any questions or concerns you'd like to talk to me about anything, please reach out. My number is 807-737-1488, extension 2209. Toll free, you can also call 1-800-667-3703. You can email me at bronwyn.slate, and that is spelled BRONWYN.SLATE@nnec.on.ca. You can connect with me through Facebook at Wahsa. You can watch all of our previous lessons on YouTube at Wahsa in YouTube. That's my channel name. Remember, all of our classes are under a playlist called SVN3E, as well as the supplementary videos for the lessons that we had those in as well. Thank you so much for joining me. Enjoy. I hope you've learned some and you enjoyed our course. Yeah, miigwech.